Hello and welcome to my channel, Rhino here. Today we're finishing up with Pastor Steve's explanation of why evolution is obviously wrong, which I'm essentially using as a warning to creationist organizations to say that this is the kind of discourse that they are helping create. I would consider Pastor Steve to be the victim here, having been deceived by these more polished presentations of the various creationist organizations. But he also teaches a course called Science and the Bible at a Bible college, so he may be a victim, but he is doing his best to make sure that the next generation of Christians are victims of creationist thinking as well. This video could also serve as a warning to anyone considering attending an unaccredited Bible college. There often isn't much in the way of making sure their teachers are actually qualified in the subjects that they teach. But that's off topic, let's continue to the video.
Let's just take something else. I may have done this one a while back. Okay, your pie hole, as they call it, because you put pie in your mouth.
Come on, have at least a little bit of respect for your audience's intelligence. Do you really think that we needed the visual of you putting your hand to your mouth to figure out that by pie hole and mouth, you meant mouth?
It's got to have bacteria on the teeth. It's got to have teeth.
Our mouths, yes, they need a combination of beneficial bacteria and teeth. But that's not how mouths would have started their evolutionary journey. The digestive system is a very basal characteristic, having its origin in the bilaterian common ancestor, bilaterians being all animals whose embryos are symmetrical on their left and right side. In the vast majority of these animals, the animal itself is basically a tube that takes in nutrients on one side, absorbs them as they pass through the middle, and expels waste on the other side. The genes that control the development and general organization of the digestive system are shared between all bilaterian animals, supporting the idea that the digestive system is evolutionarily ancient.
And it's got to have an esophagus, and it's got to have a little flapper in the back that some food goes to your lungs and some goes to your stomach.
If you regularly have some food going into your lungs, you may need to see a doctor. It's supposed to be the air that goes to your lungs, while food and drink goes to your stomach. That's actually one of the bad designs of our bodies that point to them not actually being designed. What kind of designer would make a system where you have to eat to live, but should something ever go slightly wrong with the eating, the food will get stuck in your air tube and kill you? There are plenty of animals out there that have separate breathing tubes that can't be clogged by food. Why wouldn't we, the special creation that is supposed to be elevated above the other animals, get the better system?
And so your body automatically knows where to send it to prevent aspiration.
Does it automatically know that? Or do you have to train babies how to eat by introducing solid foods very slowly so they don't choke on the harder to eat ones? I feel like it'd be a lot easier to have your child not die of choking if choking were just not possible in the first place. About 75 kids die of choking on food in the United States every year. It's not a huge number, but considering the all-powerful designer could easily have kept the two tubes separate should he have wanted to, that's 75 deaths of children every year that are directly that designer's fault, not to mention the 12,000 ER visits for choking-related injuries in children. So, yeah, tell me more about this perfect design involving a flap of tissue that can easily be tricked into blocking the wrong hole.
And we could stop right there. We won't even go into when it gets there, that it's got to have the gastric acids, that it's got to have how it divides up the vitamins to get into the bloodstream, to take it everywhere.
No, by all means, let's get into that. How could that have evolved? Well, let's just run through a little thought experiment. The first organism would have been single-celled organisms that simply absorb their food from their environment through their cell membrane in a process known as endocytic uptake. Eventually, single-celled organisms evolved that could eat other single-celled organisms in a process known as phagocytic uptake. When multicellularity evolved, the phagocytes were able to work together to encase their food in a manner that would likely have been similar to how placozoans feed, placozoans being the simplest known animal to still exist. They are weird little critters that are basically a flat gelatinous disc. We don't even know what their natural habitats look like or what they eat in nature. They were first found on aquarium glass in a lab in the 1800s, and everything we know about them has been learned in a lab setting. But one thing we do know about them is that while they are not bilaterians, they are divided into a top and bottom, a dorsal and a ventral, and the cells on the top and bottom are the equivalent of ectoderm and endoderm cells in more complex animals. When eating, these guys use their ventral cells to excrete digestive fluid that helps with the absorption of nutrients, and will often, though not always, pinch their ventral surface into a sac to surround their food and digest more efficiently. Now back to our evolutionary thought experiment. As time goes on, more efficient feeding mechanisms develop, with the beginnings of a mouth and anus type tube system passing food from one end and expelling waste out the other. An evolutionary arms race would have led to the development of digestive enzymes and teeth, with animals that develop resistance to being digested having an advantage over the animals that don't produce as strong an enzyme or don't crunch up their food first. But no, at no point was there a proto-human running around with no teeth or stomach acid trying to eat and digest things for which teeth and stomach acid are needed.
And all this in your brain. So let's go back. So there's this being that doesn't have a mouth that's somehow getting nutrients from further away.
Yeah, I'd say the Placozoans are a really good example of such a being. They don't have mouths, but they don't seem to have a problem getting nutrients from their environments.
And then it just begins to open out over the course of thousands of years.
It's not so much about opening the mouth over thousands of years, but rather that the digestive pouch that is formed for the purpose of eating becomes a permanent fixture, and if it's permanent, it needs an entrance and an exit.
And so then it gets other forms of nutrition. And so things start going in its mouth.
Yeah, once the mouth developed, organisms would have been able to take advantage of new sources of nutrients that weren't available to them before. And different organisms developed different mouth shapes to take advantage of different nutrient sources.
And so then over the course of time, it quits gumming and teeth start coming in.
Teeth would definitely have had their evolutionary beginnings fairly early. I mean, after all, sharks have been around in one form or another for about 450 million years now, and they definitely have teeth. And their teeth are morphologically similar to the teeth that evolved later, suggesting that the mutations that led to shark teeth were shared by the common ancestor of sharks and other toothed animals. The most basal teeth are basically calcified pads in the animal's mouths that allowed them to crush and crunch their prey, and this basal structure eventually became more specialized, and as with mouths, various specializations allowed the animals to take advantage of different food sources.
Got it gummed.
What a delightful image that was. I made a little loop of it for your enjoyment.
Everything, and so then teeth start coming in.
First come the hard calcified pads, but yes, eventually teeth.
And this has all happened over the course of just hundreds of thousands of years.
Possibly. I'm not sure how quickly organisms went from hard pads to actual teeth. It could have been that quick, but my money would be on 1 to 2 million years at least.
We're not talking about billions of years when you're talking about humans. Evolutionists will tell you that.
Teeth did not have to evolve independently in every organism that has them. We inherited them from a common ancestor, and then in the individual species, the teeth specialize based on what they use them for. So no, we wouldn't be talking billions of years from the evolution of the mouth to the evolution of teeth, but we could very well be talking millions of years. You seem to be under the impression that each species had to evolve all of their characteristics independently from all of the other species, which demonstrates that your view on evolution is seriously and fundamentally flawed.
And so then, your lungs develop and...
No, lungs have their developmental beginnings in the fish ancestor of tetrapods before we moved out onto land. The hominid ancestor of humans already had lungs.
Things are developing, and all of a sudden gastric acids in your whole gastrointestinal system, 20 feet of a large intestine, 8 feet of a small intestine, or 6, or whatever it is.
If you're going to give those numbers in an attempt to go for the wow factor and trying to give the impression that something so impressive couldn't possibly have evolved, then at least make sure you have the right numbers. The small intestines are about 6 meters long, and the large intestines are about 1.5 meters long. That's 20 feet and 5 feet, for those of us who have not yet advanced to the objectively superior metric system.
Are all going, and you've got the waste system going. It doesn't work partially.
No, you're right, it doesn't, which is probably why nobody has ever proposed that it has. All of these things would have evolved in tandem. Nature doesn't focus on one specific feature to the exclusion of all others. That just wouldn't make sense or work. So maybe learn what evolution actually is before trying to explain it yourself.
All that has to be fully formed and fully filled
No, the individual features do not need to start out fully formed. A partial digestive system is very useful to placozoans. A partial visual system is very useful for flatworms. Having a hard pad in your mouth was more useful to the platypus than teeth, to the point where platypus babies actually have teeth but lose them before they start eating anything that might require teeth. Partial lungs are a common development in fish. Hell, fully formed lungs are pretty common in fish. Some species of fish will actually drown if they don't have access to air that they can breathe. So all these traits develop in tandem, but their developmental paths include several useful steps on the way to becoming what we might refer to as complete now, even though we have no way of determining what our current organs and systems might turn into in the future.
And so people who believe in that have been inaccurately taught,
says the guy who just spent almost 6 minutes presenting a completely inaccurate picture of what evolution is.
Are looking at things very superficially.
Again, says the guy who clearly hasn't done anything amounting to a deep dive into the topic. And let me just take this moment to remind everyone here that this guy teaches a class at a Bible college called Science and the Bible, just in case you forgot.
Humans look a lot like apes. Must have come from them.
There is way more to it than that. Weren't you just saying that the evolutionists are the ones who are looking at it superficially? How have you demonstrated that we haven't come from chimps? How do you account for the endogenous retroviruses that we have in common with chimps? How do you account for the fact that all mammals have a gene for synthesizing vitamin C, but it has been switched off in primates, with the same mutation for all the primates being the mutation that switched it off? How do you account for the differing degree of similarities of genetic material lining up with the evolutionary phylogenies that are constructed using both morphological and genetic data? I don't think you can accuse the people on the side of evolution of only looking at it superficially until you actually at least try to answer these questions.
Instead of perfection of design, that's just the best way things could be.
So you're saying that humans look similar to apes because of perfection of design. That's just the best way that things could be. Did you consider the fact that if you are right, then that means God designed an animal that both superficially and when closely examined, morphologically and genetically, appears to be very closely related to us, but this same God expects us to believe that these animals are actually not related to us at all? And he designed them in such a way that, when organized by character traits, the animals fit perfectly into a nested hierarchy that matches up pretty closely to the apparent genetic relationships. But no, they aren't actually related. God just designed them to have all the appearance of being related, for reasons.
Or maybe God teaching us that we don't want to be like animals, that we're actually created in the image of God, any number of things.
So God made animals that appear to be very closely related to us to teach us that we don't want to be like those animals, that we were made in the image of God. Wouldn't that rather teach us that the image of God is also very close to that of the animals, given how similar we are to them? And again, I would like to point out that you accuse the evolutionists of only looking at things superficially, and the alternative you are presenting is a couple of vague conjectures which can never actually be scientifically verified. They just feel right to you.
There's your hand bone, the complexities of veins and the bones in your hand, your fingers, couldn't have just happened. I mean, because it's useless until it works.
No, it was useful as a fin for swimming until it developed hard lobes at the base that were also useful, if inefficient, for moving on land, and then gradually became more specialized to the environment as time went on.
So it's not going to be a third of the way, a quarter of the way, 10% of the way, 5% of the way, 50% of the way.
I've lost track of how many times I've had to say this by now, but that's not how anyone thinks it happened.
It's not. It can't occur. It doesn't happen like that.
You're right. It doesn't. And nobody thinks that it does except for creationists.
And that's the reason you have Stephen Jay Gould and then a French evolution started coming out with hopeful monsters, that things came fully formed and fully filled just every 50,000 years or so.
The hopeful monsters that Gould wrote about were not fully formed organisms popping up with no apparent origin. It was the idea that small changes to an embryo could result in large-scale changes to the adult organism. And this idea is accurate and has been experimentally verified. We can do all sorts of weird things to different organisms by making small changes to to Hox genes, which are the group of genes that control the body plan of all animals. A small change to a Hox gene can add or remove entire body segments, including all the muscles, tissues, nerves, bones, and circulatory elements for that segment. It can put a leg where antennae are supposed to grow. These genes are, to all appearances, homologous across all animals. In other words, if it's an animal, its body plan is controlled by Hox genes, and all animals inherited their Hox genes from the same common ancestor.
But even then, there had to be a man fully formed or an animal with reproductive systems that fit perfectly in a woman.
No, again, sexual reproduction is something that evolved gradually, and we have sexually reproducing algae that have what looks like a basal form of our sexual reproduction. They aren't male and female per se, but male-ish and female-ish. One algae would be slightly concave and the other is slightly convex, facilitating sexual reproduction. Then, over evolutionary time, these features specialize into the different types of sexual reproduction that we see today. I'm kinda seeing a trend here. Everything this guy brings up seems to have a very basal origin that specialized over time, but he's presenting it as if it only first developed in the hominid ancestor to humans.
That is fully formed and fully filled. Of all the different animal species. Unless there's some with abiogenesis or something. But
okay, are you saying that sexual reproduction happened at abiogenesis? Or do you think that abiogenesis is a word that means asexual reproduction? Because either way you're wrong, but the way you phrase that is really confusing.
see, it just couldn't happen. So evolution, your eye, you got this blob of protoplasm there, and it's passed on from generation to generation to generation for hundreds of thousands of years till finally, it works and it goes to your brain.
Oh my God, stop giving bad examples. The evolution of the eye is well understood, and in a turn that is shocking to absolutely nobody, it's not even close to what this guy just described.
And so we walked around blind till our eyes worked, you know.
Nope. Our eyes evolved a long time ago, probably about 540 million years ago. They would have started as just light-sensitive patches of tissue, similar to those found on flatworms and jellyfish. Then, making this patch slightly concave would have allowed the organism to sense the direction that the light came from. Then, there is an evolutionary pressure to deepen the depression, because the deeper the depression, the easier it is to tell which direction the light is coming from. Eventually, it gets so deep that it forms a pinhole camera, providing an actual image of the organism's environment, such as the eyes of the nautilus. Then it would be helpful if a clear mass of cells were to cover this pinhole to protect the sensitive cells inside. It doesn't need to be a focusing lens just yet, it just needs to be a transparent layer of cells. But then once you have this layer, slight modifications to it allow for a more focused image that allows more light in by widening the aperture, until eventually you get to modern eyes and all the variations of them.
And nothing got us. Well, they were all blind too, the T-Rexes and everything. Oh, but wait, they weren't coterminous with me.
Are you even hearing yourself? Have you ever seen an image of a T-Rex with no eyes?
What do you call a blind dinosaur?
I don't know. What do you call a blind dinosaur?
Do you think he saw us?
Why would you think that evolutionary biologists didn't think that the eye evolved until hominids came along? Why would you even say that we thought dinosaurs were blind? How can you not see the problems with your own argument when you say things like this? Somebody needs to send this guy a copy of Grandmother Fish. He just needs to work on understanding the basics of evolution.
So, do you see the sketchiness of evolution?
No. I see the sketchiness of any college that would hire you on to teach about science.
And it's not just humans, it's dogs, and it's cats, and it's duck-billed platypuses, and it's sloths, and it's whatever else that lives, you know.
Yes, and when you arrange all of these organisms by their shared characteristics, they fit into an evolutionary tree that can help you figure out the order in which these different characteristics developed. Internal pregnancy is unique to mammals, but the mammals that are most basal, and therefore most closely related to reptiles, lay eggs. The ones that are slightly less basal, but still more basal than most, have very short pregnancies and then carry their young in an external pouch after that. Almost like full-term pregnancies are something that develops slowly, leaving behind the remnants of different steps of the development. That's it for this one. Today's comment of the day comes to us from Kimberly Kenyon, who says, "I get dramatic pauses, but if you use it wrong, you just become unintelligible by ending sentences too early, or you make awkward pauses. It gets really annoying really quick." This was on one of my videos dealing with Greg Kokel, and yeah, it got tiresome. Usually, I script my videos on the fly. I don't pre-watch the videos, I just watch enough to get a sense for whether or not responding to it is worth it for me. In Greg's case, there were multiple instances where he would take a long pause, I would pause the video thinking that he was done, write an entire paragraph responding to what he just said, press play, and then realize that the final word or two of the sentence that he was pausing in the middle of completely changed the meaning of the sentence, rendering my paragraph irrelevant. There were a couple of times where I just said fuck it, and I left it in and then amended my response after he finished the sentence because I got tired of rewriting my script. It was annoying, to say the least. Thanks for watching. Special thanks as always to my patrons, David Schinkel, Lynn Dobbs, Mark McManus, What Jesus, and all the rest, who are the deep dive to buttress the superficiality of my channel. If you'd like to completely misunderstand everything and then present that as your opponent being superficial, you can support the channel for as little as $1 per week over at patreon.com/ViceRhino. Other ways to support the channel, such as direct donation or my Amazon wishlist, are linked in the description, as well as my social media accounts and my P.O. Box address. See you next time!